Lecture 9, How to Critique. So we're going to go over how to give design feedback that is helpful and respectful and grounded in the principles that we've discussed versus personal taste, right? So design is an aesthetic thing, and so a lot of times we are kind of driven by just personal preferences versus the rules. And so critique should follow the rules in a lot of instances. So you can make personal preference recommendations, but it should be grounded in things that kind of will they'll transfer across all instances, right? So critique is a really core skill for what we're going to be talking about here. It's what you're doing is not just making the visuals, but also being able to evaluate them. So we're going to be focusing on revising visual drafts based on critique, accessibility checks and reflection, and justifying decisions. And so that justification kind of comes through in the response to the critique. So why does critique matter? It's an essential design skill. It helps you to improve your clarity and communication. It helps the creator to see some of their blind spots. It strengthens your own design literacy when you're looking at somebody else's work, and it prepares you for actual collaborative work. So if you're doing a project in school, it might be a little bit different than when you're doing a project with your colleagues in work. And so it'll just kind of get you ready for doing it in all these different contexts. And critiquing is not being negative, right? Like it's not only being critical in that kind of harsh, judgmental sense. It's about helping somebody to make sure their message is clear. And so critiquing is specific and constructive based on these principles we're talking about. It's about the actual work that's done, and it's collaborative, meaning it should be a discussion. It's not just like, here's all my feedback and I'm never going to engage with you again. Hopefully the person getting the feedback is going to want to talk to you to be like, oh, can you explain why you said that? Is this change responding to your critique? It should be a iterative process. It should develop over time. And so critique is not personal. It isn't based on your aesthetic preferences. Like I said, it shouldn't be things that are just personal. So, maybe something isn't inspiring certain emotions within you, but maybe you're not the intended audience of it. And so you want to make sure that that's why you're relying on the principles. And it's not vague, right? It's confusing. That is not helpful in any way. What about it is confusing? Is it the size? Is it the color? Is it the placement? All of those different pieces. That's going to give somebody a lot more useful feedback. And so it's not harsh. It's not overly nitpicky. Big picture, they're in professional contexts, critique is for the overall message that's being stated, and there will probably be another stage later for editing that'll get like the copy editing sort of pieces. So you don't need to be focusing on those sorts of really nitpicky aspects when you're doing your critiques. And so we're focused on the decisions on the product and not on the individual. And so you've all definitely heard about the feedback sandwich before. We can use that same sort of idea, but just do it better. And so a practical structure for critique is first observing it. So describe what you're seeing. This will also be really good for the person receiving the critique because they're going to understand the headspace that you're in and how you interpreted everything right away. And so that's going to tell them whether they're meeting their goals in getting their message across or not. So that's a very, very useful piece of it. And then evaluating, looking at actually what's in the design. And that's when you start to relate it back to the principles. Is it abiding by them? Is it missing any of them? Are there any accessibility issues that you can spot? And then take all of that from your evaluation and suggest alternatives. So try to give them steps that they can actually take to improve it. The recommendations should be the most valuable piece of this. And that's probably what a lot of the discussion would be around. Why did you recommend that? How can I actually employ that here? And so it keeps it all very grounded. It keeps it actionable. It's not jumping ahead, right? You're not just saying change that. You're giving the full context or understanding how you interpreted it, how you evaluated it, and then hearing what you think they should change. So we use the principles as the anchors. These are our points that we will constantly come back to. So things like the contrast, does everything stand out? The hierarchy, are we moving through it in the right sort of order? The alignment, is just the layout nice, right? Is it making sense? Proximity, is everything in the space that it should be? Is it related to all of its partners? Repetition, So this is really important when we have multiple pieces, right? If we have a full package, is there that visual consistency across the infographic and the logo and the PowerPoint template? So if you're using all of these, if you're relying back on this, it's going to be really easy for the person to take it in because it's based on these core design principles and not on anything personal. So, example critique. This is obviously very weak critique. This is messy. I don't like the colors. The font's weird. That's like all grounded in personal preference, right? And so maybe you are not the intended audience. So it actually, maybe that's a sign of success, right? Maybe it's just somebody who's having a really bad day. They haven't had enough coffee yet, so they're grumpy, right? There's just nothing of value here. And so the person receiving the critique is not going to take action on it. They're going to see that that's one person having a rough time and just excuse it as that. So even if maybe the colors aren't appropriate for it or the font is not readable or it's not accessible, the way that it's delivered means that it's not actually going to be acted on. And so instead, stronger critique has more to it, essentially, right? So it's identifying what the issues are and then giving suggestions for how to change it. Try increasing the contrast so the headline stands out more. So that means the headline wasn't standing out, and here's the way to solve it. Aligning the icons might help with the structure. Consider using different fonts to show that hierarchy to make it more clear. All right? So that strong critique all has things that could be actionable. Clarifying questions, right? So before you're actually giving your critique, make sure that you're understanding the intended audience, the purpose, the context. So even if you aren't the intended audience yourself, you can understand what they were going for and imagine that you're taking this in as that audience. So if we think about Glossier, if somebody was critiquing their package, you would want to know who is their intended audience. Generally, it's probably like women aged mid-teens to late 20s probably, right? And so that bright baby pink might appeal to them, whereas somebody in their late 50s or somebody who's never worn makeup before, they might think it's disgusting, but it doesn't matter because they're not the intended audience. So that critique, that bright pink or baby pink could be an alienating color, might not be relevant, right? So you just need to know that because you can't give any meaningful critique unless you actually know what the intention is. And so I've said this before, but be specific and actionable. This should guide everything that you're actually transmitting to another person. Make the suggestions actually usable, right? Encourage options. They might have done something because they just literally couldn't think of an idea for an alternative. And so if you can make a really valuable critique that gives some, you have outside perspective, you're not as tied into it. And so you might be able to give much better feedback than somebody could ever think of for their project themselves. Your tone matters as well, right? You don't want to come across like a jerk. You want to make sure that you're being professional. And so this is whether it's critique for students, your colleagues as students, or for colleagues in a professional environment, or just your friends, right? You want to make sure that you're using good tone that's not going to disrupt any relationships. You're focused on the actual product, not on the human. You want to use neutral language as much as possible. You want to talk about the strengths as well. So the things that they can improve on. But if you can identify what was really strong, it might help them understand why those other pieces are weaker too. And so all of this is supposed to be a growing process. Nobody is expected to do anything perfect right away, especially when you get into like the full brand kit. There's so many different pieces of that. Not many people's brains can just sit down and do it all in one go. It's going to be something that will develop over time, and context and audience, those things might evolve over time as well. So we need to get into the mindset of expecting that we're going to constantly be updating some of our formats for our choices. So let's walk through an example critique. So I have a slide that is pulled from a Canva template. So another example of how Canva templates can be really not great. I've made very, very minor tweaks to emphasize some of the negative aspects that you might find, but this is very close to the actual template that exists on Canva. So you've been warned. Take a minute and look at this. There's a lot going on here, right? pieces of it individually could be very pretty, right? Like there's some really visually appealing stuff here. The color palette, it's nice. There's variety. But taken as a whole, there's a lot of issues here. So like one of the first things that I would probably say are there's a lot of text and it's very hard to read it. The contrast here isn't great. So when somebody sees this slide, they're going to be moving all over the place trying to take this all in. So I would recommend that somebody might work on cutting down the text or maybe turning this into multiple slides if the content is actually really important. Maybe pull back on some of these icons. The Canva built-in options are not really contributing to the overall message being communicated. The icons with the magnifying glass, it's nice that there's 3 clearly delineated little text blurbs, and they help with that. But in themselves, the color choice it clashes with the background a little bit. And the text, the font, the size and the color there makes it difficult to read. So maybe if those were turned into one slide and then the other text was turned into a second slide, it might all balance out a little bit better. The material looks good. It's just hard to take it all in one slide. This almost looks like it would work better as a foundation for like a poster that somebody could present versus a slide that they would have in a presentation. Right? So there's lots of positives happening here, but there's also just a lot in general happening here. And so there's some ways that somebody could take this and turn it into a couple slides that would actually be really quality versus trying to fit it all into one here. So when you're the one actually being critiqued, you do also have to receive it well. And so you have to be in the right kind of mindset to do that. It's something, as much as the person critiquing your work has to be sure to focus on the work itself and not on you as the person, you need to be sure that you're not taking it as the person and it's about the material that you're producing. So you want to listen. You want to make sure that you're taking it all in, right? The way that somebody's giving their version of a feedback sandwich, it might come in a different order than you're anticipating. So you want to take it all in before you react and then ask your clarifying questions. And so you also get to agree or disagree, right? Like critiques, it does not mean that the person giving you the critique is correct all the time and you are incorrect all the time. There can be compromise, or you can have a discussion that would help you both realize a third option that maybe would work better. And so you should use your critiques as a resource. Don't feel like they're a rule. It's not authoritative. You must do this and you must do that and you must not do that. It's just, this is how somebody else is perceiving what you've created. And here are some suggestions to make sure that it comes through as strongly as possible. But you have ultimate editorial control, right? So you get to decide what is appropriate or not. Maybe you know your audience better than the person critiquing you. And so some of the suggestions might not be appropriate. Perfectly fine, but you need to yourself be able to justify why you did take this suggestion and why you didn't take that suggestion. So overall takeaways, your critique should be based on the principles and not on preferences. It's about your audience and the purpose. And so both parties, the critiquer and the critiquee, need to be clear about that. Any constructive criticism, feedback that you give, it needs to be specific and it needs to be actionable. And then the tone, the way that you're giving and receiving is really important as well, just to keep that collaborative kind of relationship alive. And giving critique will make you better at design yourself, right? Whenever we're seeing options of something or different ways that people interpret something, it's going to help us add more to our own repertoire. So you might think that you don't like doing critiques now. It might be awkward for you. You might be kind of still thinking in that more, this is a personal critique versus a material critique mindset. But know that long term, it's actually going to make you better at using all of these design tools yourself.